El 8 de diciembre de 1942, El Agheila, Libya. The desert wind cuts through the Italian encampment like a blade. Fine sand drifts over rows of battered M13 over 40 tanks, their engines coughing in protest as mechanics struggle to coax them to life. Lieutenant Carlo Benedetti wipes dust from his goggles and squints toward the horizon, where a low thunder rolls not from the weather but from engines, American engines. Inside his tank, the smell of oil, sweat, and diesel hangs thick. The intercom crackles with static barely functional. Commandante, radio not working again, the loader mutters. Benedetti sighs. Then we use flags, or prayers. Out beyond the dunes, reconnaissance reports speak of a new kind of enemy American armored divisions armed with something massive, reliable, and fast. The M4 Sherman. The Italians have heard rumors from the Afrika Korps that these tanks can cross sand like ships through waves, that their guns can pierce armor at twice the range of anything Italian steel can deliver. Still, pride runs deep. The men of the 132nd Armored Division Ariete are veterans. They fought at Tobruk, Gazala, and Halfaya. Them 13 over 40 tanks boxy, riveted, outdated, maybe slow and undergunned, but they are theirs. The order comes at dawn. Advance and engage. Engines growl to life. The convoy lurches forward in waves, sand billowing behind as the sun rises like a furnace over the horizon. Through his periscope, Benedetti spots the faint glint of metal across the dunes, hulls moving low and steady. Shermans. Then the first shell lands a thunderclap of steel and sand. It doesn't explode near them, it pierces straight through the lead tank. The Italian crew doesn't even have time to return fire. Range? Benedetti yells. Over 1,000 meters. His gunner answers, disbelief in his voice. Their 47mm gun is useless at that distance. They fire anyway. The round hits the Sherman's frontal armor and ricochets like a pebble off stone. The Shermans keep coming, their engines humming like lions. A second Italian tank erupts in flames. The desert fills with the screams of wounded men and the roar of American cannons. Inside the M13 over 40, Benedetti feels the turret shudder as the loader slams in another shell. Sweat drips down his neck, and his hands tremble on the grips. Fire! The shot misses. Dust blinds them. The loader shouts, "We can't stay here!" Benedetti looks through the slit window. The horizon is crawling with Shermans. The Italian line is collapsing. Over the radio, the voice of his colonel crackles in and out, frantic. Ariete, hold, for Rome. Then silence. He grips the intercom. All units fall back. We can't fight ghosts with pebbles. But it's too late. A shell strikes just beneath their hull. The tank lifts, flips, and crashes onto its side. As the flames spread, Benedetti crawls free into the sand, coughing. All around him, the battlefield glows orange with burning metal. His tank, his pride, is nothing but a shell. And for the first time he realizes, this isn't a battle. It's an execution. The 9th of December 1942, El Agheila, the following morning. The desert is quiet now. Smoke curls above blackened hulls, stretching for miles like a graveyard of machines. Italian medics move among the wreckage. Silent, faces grey with disbelief. Lieutenant Carlo Benedetti sits on a sand dune beside the burned-out carcass of his M13 over 40. The paint has blistered away, revealing the soft, riveted steel beneath the kind of armor that once looked so proud at parades in Rome. Now it's brittle, melted, defeated. He can still hear the echoes of yesterday's battle, the dull clang of Italian shells bouncing off American Shermans, the hiss of ricochets that never found their mark. He remembers watching one of his comrades, Sergeant Lupo, fire 3 rounds at a Sherman only to see each one spark uselessly against the tank's hull before a single 75mm shell tore his turret open like paper. A desert fox scurries across the wreckage. It pauses atop the Sherman's track, sniffing the air, unbothered. Nearby, a German officer from the Afrika Korps Oberleutnant Weiss surveys the battlefield through binoculars. His voice is sharp, clinical. Your tanks fought bravely, Lieutenant, he says in accented Italian. But bravery doesn't stop a 75mm high-velocity shell. Benedetti turns to him, eyes hollow. You think I don't know that? Weiss lowers his binoculars. Our panzers are barely enough to face them. And yours, he gestures toward the wrecks. They were never meant for this kind of war. He's right. The Italian M13 over 40 introduced with fanfare in 1940 is already obsolete. Thin armor, a weak engine that overheats in desert heat, and a 47mm gun designed for infantry support, not tank duels. Even the radio, when it works, has a range barely reaching a few hundred meters. By contrast, the Americans' M4 Sherman is a marvel of wartime engineering, a stabilized 75mm main gun, fast traverse turret, thicker armor, reliable mechanics, and radios in every vehicle. The difference isn't just power, it's philosophy. The Sherman was built for teams, for coordination, for modern warfare. The Italian machines were built for show. That night, Benedetti sits with his men beside a dying campfire. The air smells of fuel and despair. We had courage, says Corporal Rinaldi, rubbing his hands for warmth. But it didn't matter. We couldn't even reach them. Next time, another mutters, we ambush, hit from the rocks. That's all we can do. Benedetti stares into the flames. Next time, he echoes. But deep down, he knows courage can't fix broken steel. Hours later, the radio sputters to life. A new order comes from Rome, relayed through the German command. The remnants of Ariete Division are to regroup near Buerat and prepare for counterattack. The men groan. Counterattack? With what tanks? No one answers. The next morning, the mechanics drag whatever engines still turn over from the battlefield wrecks. Oil leaks, gears grind, and sand seeps into every bolt. One tank moves forward a few meters, then stalls again. Benedetti climbs onto it anyway, tightening his gloves. If this is what we have, he says, then this is what we fight with. The horizon glows red with another sunrise and another battle waiting beyond it. December 13, 1942, Buerat Line, Libya. The morning sun bakes the desert floor until it shimmers like molten glass. The remnants of Italy's Ariete Division are arrayed across the dunes, a skeleton force of battered tanks, patched with scrap metal and salvaged parts. Mechanics work frantically, wiping sweat from their faces, pouring sand-clogged fuel through torn filters. The air smells of oil, gunpowder, and desperation. Lieutenant Carlo Benedetti stands beside his newly repaired M14 over 41, its engine rumbling unevenly. The newer model offers slightly more horsepower than his old M13, but he knows it won't matter. The Americans are coming again, and with them, their Shermans. Lieutenant, calls Corporal Rinaldi from the turret, we've got 6 shells left, and half of them might jam. Benedetti smirks grimly. Then make everyone count. Through his binoculars, he sees movement far across the horizon, dark silhouettes rising through the heat haze. At first, they seem small, then the shapes grow. Solidify lines of M4 Shermans, rolling forward with mechanical confidence. Behind them, dust storms bloom as American supply trucks follow, bringing ammunition, water, and fuel luxuries the Italians can only dream of. The order crackles over the field radio. Ariete, hold your ground. Delay them at all costs. No. The first Sherman fires. The shell lands short, sending a column of sand into the sky. Then another shot, this one, hits an Italian tank dead on, tearing through its thin armor. The explosion echoes for miles. Range 800 meters, Rinaldi shouts. Target the lead tank, Benedetti yells back. Fire! The M14's 47mm cannon kicks a sharp crack. The shell flies straight and hits its mark, but when the smoke clears, the Sherman still advances. The round has done nothing. Hit confirmed, no penetration, Rinaldi shouts, disbelief etched in his voice. Again! Another shot, another clang. Still nothing. Then the reply comes. The Sherman's 75mm shell hits their flank. The tank shudders violently, throwing Benedetti against the turret wall. The world goes white with noise and dust. "Damage report!" he yells, coughing. "Track's gone. We're hit." Benedetti opens the hatch. Outside, the battlefield is chaos, Italian tanks burning, crews scrambling for cover, the desert littered with twisted metal. Overhead, Allied fighter bombers scream down, strafing the survivors. The desert turns into a furnace. Nearby, a German officer radios frantically for air support, but his calls vanish into static. "They're too many," he shouts. "It's overrun." Benedetti waves his men out of the crippled tank. "Get out! Fall back to the ridge!" Oh. As they run, the Sherman guns turn their way. The sand erupts around them in bursts of fire. Benedetti dives behind a dune as another explosion tears apart his M13 over 41, his third tank in 2 months. When the dust finally settles, the battlefield is silent except for the crackling of burning fuel. By nightfall, what remains of the Ariete division is gone, reduced to scattered survivors retreating west under cover of darkness. The once proud armoured spearhead of Mussolini's army has been broken beyond repair. In the distance, Benedetti watches the Shermans move methodically across the wreckage, their silhouettes glinting in the moonlight like giants surveying the ruins of an older age. Rinaldi sits beside him, his face streaked with soot. "They don't even look like they're fighting," he mutters. "They just move." Benedetti doesn't answer. He knows now what every Italian tanker has begun to realize: courage means nothing when your armor is paper, your guns are weak, and your enemies fight from another century entirely. He looks west, where the last German convoys are retreating toward Tunisia. "We'll follow them," he says quietly, "but it won't matter. The war's already passed us by." The desert wind howls through the wrecks, carrying away the last echoes of Italian steel. The 14th of January 1943, south of Tripoli, Libya. Night falls cold and clear over the desert. The survivors of the Ariete division trudge westward in silence, their boots crunching on hard sand. The once proud column that had marched to war 2 years ago, banners flying, engines roaring, is now a ragged line of men and a handful of trucks. Lieutenant Carlo Benedetti rides in the back of a fuel lorry with Corporal Rinaldi and 3 others. Their uniforms are caked with dust, their rifles nearly useless, their morale long since burned out. Every few minutes, the truck coughs and stutters. "We'll run dry by morning," the driver mutters. Behind them, the horizon glows faintly, the fires of Buerat still burning. The radio crackles faintly, bringing in a German transmission. Benedetti recognizes the voice of Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, calm yet strained. "All Axis units are to withdraw to Tunisia, maintain cohesion, delay the enemy." Rommel's words echo like a final confession. Even the desert fox, the man whose daring once inspired awe, is in retreat. By dawn, Allied patrol planes appear overhead, circling like vultures. The convoy scatters. Trucks zigzag across the sand, trying to avoid the strafing runs. Bullets whip through the air. One vehicle bursts into flames, sending a column of smoke into the pale sky. Benedetti shouts, "Out! Get out!" as the truck jerks violently. They dive into a shallow wadi, sand exploding around them. When the planes finally vanish, the survivors crawl out. The road is gone. Their compass broken. They walk, for hours. Days blur together the endless horizon, the taste of grit, the hollow rattle of canteens. Occasionally they pass the carcass of a tank half buried in sand, Italian, British, German, it doesn't matter anymore. The desert has swallowed them all. On the 3rd night, they reach a makeshift repair outpost guarded by German engineers. Dozens of wrecked panzers and Italian M13s sit in silence, their turrets missing, their engines stripped. Mechanics scavenge parts under lantern light, trying to piece together 1 or 2 tanks that can still move. Benedetti approaches a German sergeant. "Can any of ours fight again?" The man shrugs. "Yours?" He gestures to the wrecks. "They're not worth the fuel." Rinaldi bristles, but Benedetti stops him with a glance. The truth is cruel but undeniable. The M13S and M14S, once symbols of Italian armor, have become relics too fragile for the desert, too weak for modern war. Still, they are ordered back into the line. On January 22, the Allies land near Tripoli. The last Axis tanks, German and Italian alike, form a desperate rearguard. Benedetti climbs into an M13 whose turret jams every third turn. His crew is exhausted, half-starved, but they load the shells anyway. The first British column appears in the distance, a formation of Shermans, moving with that steady, unstoppable rhythm he's come to dread. "Do we fight?" Rinaldi asks. Benedetti stares for a long moment, then nods. "We fight." They open fire 1, 2, 3 shots. The rounds spark uselessly off the Sherman's armor. The reply comes instantly. A 75mm shell slams into their gun mantlet, blowing the hatch clean off. He wakes up hours later, lying in the sand beside his burning tank. Around him, the sounds of battle fade into the wind. By evening, the last remnants of Ariete are gone. Some surrender. Others vanish into the desert. The Italian armored corps, once the pride of Mussolini's army, ceases to exist. Benedetti and Rinaldi march west, joining a retreating German column under a sky streaked with the smoke of defeat. For the first time, Benedetti allows himself to say it aloud, "It's over." "That." Rinaldi looks at him. "For us?" He nods. "For everyone here." Behind them, the desert glows red, not with victory, but with the last light of a dying empire. March 1943 Merith Line, southern Tunisia. The desert changes here from endless dunes to hard, broken ridges of clay and rock. It is a different battlefield, but the same war, and the same men tired, hungry, and running out of time. The remnants of the Ariete Division, now absorbed into the German command, dig in alongside the Afrika Corps at the Merith Line, the last natural defence between the Allies and the heart of North Africa. Lieutenant Carlo Benedetti stands over a map illuminated by a single lantern. His eyes trace the defensive line carved along the old French fortifications, trenches, bunkers, minefields, but he knows it won't hold. The Shermans are coming again. "Lieutenant," Rinaldi says, approaching with a battered canteen. "Rumour is the Americans have hundreds of them and new ones too." Benedetti forces a thin smile. "Hundreds? Try thousands." The next morning, the ground trembles. Allied artillery begins its symphony, hundreds of guns pounding the Italian and German positions in unison. The shells come in waves, turning the desert floor into a storm of dust and flame. "Take cover!" Benedetti yells. His men dive into trenches as explosions rip apart the ridge. When the shelling stops, the silence is worse. From the haze, the Shermans emerge, dozens of them, side by side, their turrets rotating like watchful predators. The Italians open fire. Their 47mm guns bark defiantly, but the shells bounce harmlessly off the advancing tanks. The Shermans reply with calm, mechanical precision. Every shot finds a target. Every impact tears another hole in the line. Within minutes, the Italian positions begin to crumble. Over the radio, the German command issues the familiar order. "Hold your ground, reinforcements are coming." But everyone knows there are no reinforcements. The Luftwaffe is gone, fuel is gone, and morale is bleeding out faster than the wounded. In a foxhole, Benedetti reloads his pistol, a useless gesture. Around him, the air is thick with smoke and grit. A Sherman rolls past, its machine gun sweeping the trenches. He can see the faces of its crew through the open hatch, calm, focused, professional. "Lieutenant!" Rinaldi shouts. "We can't stay!" They fall back through the chaos, stumbling over wrecks of their own tanks. One M14 burns furiously, ammunition cooking off in rhythmic bursts. Nearby, German engineers detonate charges to prevent the enemy from capturing what little remains of the line. By dusk, the battle is lost. The Merith line is breached. The Italians retreat north again, toward El Hama, toward Tunis, toward nowhere. That night, as they regroup under a grove of olive trees, Benedetti sits by a small fire. His uniform is torn, his hands black with soot. Rinaldi hands him a dented tin of rations, their last. "I used to believe in our tanks," Rinaldi says quietly. "Even when everyone mocked them, they were our pride." Benedetti nods slowly. "Pride is what we had when we didn't know better." He looks toward the west, where the horizon flickers with the lights of the Allied advance, an endless procession of tanks and trucks, moving with that terrible inevitability he's learned to recognize. "They fight like machines," he says softly, "and we're still men." In the distance, he hears the rumble of engines, steady, confident, unstoppable, the sound of the future. The desert wind blows through the camp, carrying with it the ashes of another lost battle. The war in Africa is nearly over. But for Benedetti, the fight is no longer about victory. It's about survival and dignity in defeat. April 1943, near Tunis, northern Tunisia. The hills of Tunisia are green this time of year, but for the retreating Axis forces, they might as well be mountains of ash. Dust rises in long, hopeless trails as columns of German and Italian troops snake north, pursued relentlessly by British and American armor. Lieutenant Carlo Benedetti rides in the back of a half-track with a mix of German infantry and Italian survivors from various units, no flags, no insignia, just tired men sharing defeat. Every few kilometers they pass the carcass of a burned-out tank, German Tigers, British Churchills, and Italian M13s alike, all stripped by scavengers and vultures. Ahead, the road splits. A sign half buried in dirt still reads Tunis, 60 kilometers. Benedetti knows they won't make it. "Fuel?" he asks the driver. The man just shakes his head. "Enough for 20 kilometers, maybe." In the distance, the thunder of artillery rolls closer. The Allied advance is relentless. The Shermans move like an iron tide, supported by endless supply trucks and aircraft that never leave the sky. Every day they advance. Every night they bomb. By contrast, the Axis army is falling apart. Food is scarce, fuel scarcer. Discipline holds, barely, out of habit more than hope. Even the Germans, once proud and unyielding, look hollow-eyed, muttering of home. At dusk, the convoy halts in a dry wadi. The men build a small fire and sit around it, the flames reflected in their helmets. A young German corporal, no older than 20, asks Benedetti, "Lieutenant, why did your tanks fight when you knew they couldn't win?" Benedetti stares at the fire for a long time before answering. "Because it was our duty. Because we hoped that courage might make up for what steel could not." The boy nods, though he doesn't quite understand. That night, the rumble of Sherman engines echoes in the distance, deep and steady, like the heartbeat of the war itself. At dawn, Allied aircraft appear over the horizon. P-40 Warhawks swoop low, strafing the road. Trucks explode in pillars of smoke. Benedetti leaps into a ditch, covering his head as shrapnel rains down. When the attack ends, half their convoy is gone. He crawls from the ditch to find Rinaldi standing beside what's left of their half-track. "They're everywhere," Rinaldi says flatly. "We can't even move without being seen." Benedetti nods. "Then we stop moving." "Oh!" That evening, orders come from German command. All Axis forces are to establish a final defensive perimeter around Tunis. Rommel is already gone, recalled to Europe. Command now rests with General von Arnim, but everyone knows it's over. The next morning, Benedetti and his men are assigned to defend a crossroads near Enfidaville. They have one functional tank, an M14 over 41 patched together with scavenged parts. The gun jams after every second shot, and the radio barely works. Still, they dig in. The Shermans come at midday, dozens of them, flanked by British infantry and air support. The Italians fire until the barrel overheats. Shell after shell clangs uselessly against enemy armor. When the tank finally takes a hit, the crew bails out. Benedetti stays long enough to light a flare, a final marker for his men to fall back. Then he watches as his last tank burns, the flames curling up into the blue Tunisian sky. By the end of April, the Axis lines collapse completely. In early May, the Allied forces reach Tunis. Over 250,000 German and Italian soldiers are trapped. Among them, Benedetti. He drops his pistol into the sand and raises his hands as British troops approach. Around him, men do the same, a sea of grey and khaki surrendering to the inevitable. As he's led away, Benedetti glances back at the wreck of his tank. The desert sun glints off the twisted metal, reflecting the colour of rusted pride. He whispers under his breath, "We built armour out of hope, and it melted in the Sunday. The war in Africa is over, but for Italy, the reckoning is only beginning." August 1943, Taranto Harbour, southern Italy. The ship creaks as it pulls into port, its decks lined with weary faces. Italian soldiers, prisoners of war, exchanged or released after the North African campaign, stare silently at the homeland they left behind. The air smells of salt and smoke, and in the distance, columns of black rise from bombed factories. Lieutenant Carlo Benedetti steps onto the pier, thinner and older than when he left. His once-pressed uniform hangs loose, bleached by desert Sunday around him. The docks are crowded with refugees, soldiers without units, and civilians scavenging among ruins. A child runs by holding a wooden toy tank. It's painted green, its barrel broken. The boy's mother snatches him away when she sees the returning soldiers, as though war itself might follow them home. Benedetti walks through the shattered streets of Taranto, past posters peeling from the walls. La vittoria è vicina. Victory is near. The words are faded now, ghostly reminders of promises no one believes. In the distance, air raid sirens begin to wail. Allied planes appear overhead, not enemies anymore, not yet allies either, just shadows of a world that no longer makes sense. He finds Rinaldi in a Red Cross camp on the outskirts of town. The corporal is thinner too, but alive. They share a moment of silence before Benedetti asks, "Any news from Rome?" "Rinaldi not scrimli. Mussolini's gone. They arrested him last month." The king switched sides. "They say we'll fight the Germans now." Benedetti laughs softly, a sound half broken, half relieved. "So that's how it ends. We lose the war twice. Italy is collapsing from within. The once proud fascist empire is now a battlefield between its former allies and its liberators. German troops occupy the north, Allied forces land in the south, and Italian soldiers are torn between loyalty, survival, and shame. In the weeks that follow, Benedetti and Rinaldi are conscripted again, this time by the co-belligerent army, the Italian forces fighting alongside the Allies against Nazi Germany. They're given new uniforms, new weapons, and a new flag, but the ghosts of the desert follow them. In a training camp near Bari, Benedetti oversees a line of new recruits, young boys, some barely 18. They look at him the way he once looked at his commanders, full of naive faith. He watches them climb into American half-tracks, the same machines that once annihilated his tanks. A US officer hands him a clipboard. "You'll be coordinating with Sherman units now," the man says. "Ever work with them before?" Benedetti pauses, staring at the distant silhouettes of Shermans parked under the Sunday. "Yes," he says quietly. "I've met them before." At night, he sits outside his tent, listening to the engines idling in the dark. The deep, steady rumble brings back memories, sand, smoke, defeat. But now it sounds different, not as threat, but as inevitability. Rinaldi joins him with 2 tin cups of coffee. "Funny, isn't it?" he says. "Once we feared them. Now they protect us." Benedetti looks out at the moonlit sea. Maybe we just learned which side of history the engine was on. Far off, the guns rumble again, this time northward, toward the Gothic line, toward the final battles of Italy's long, bitter war. For Benedetti, it no longer matters who wins or loses. He has seen the truth that every soldier eventually learns, that courage without power is tragedy, and that pride without progress leads only to ruin. The tanks will roll again, Shermans, this time, and he will follow, not as conqueror, not as defender, but as witness. And as the wind carries the faint smell of oil and steel, he whispers the words he once spoke in the desert. Machines don't care who they fight for, only who builds them. May 1000 945 northern Italy, near Milan. The war is over. The guns are silent, the sky clear for the first time in years. Along a winding country road, wrecked vehicles, German panzers, American Shermans, and the last rusting Italian M13 lie scattered beneath the spring sun like fossils of a dying age. Lieutenant Carlo Benedetti walks alone through the wreckage. His uniform bears no insignia now, just the dust of another lost generation. Every few meters he stops to study what remains. A torn tread here, a shattered turret there, a cracked periscope glinting in the grass. He runs his hand across the hull of an M13 over 40, the same kind he once commanded in Libya. The steel is cool beneath his fingers, its once proud rivets softened by rust. "We built you to win a war we didn't understand," he murmurs. Behind him, Rinaldi approaches with a small group of Allied engineers cataloguing the wrecks. "You all right, Lieutenant?" Benedetti smiles faintly. "Just visiting old friends." The engineers pass, marking serial numbers and photographing the twisted hulks relics of a vanished world. One of them, an American sergeant, pauses beside Benedetti. "These Italian tanks," he says, "they had spirit, just not enough engine." Benedetti chuckles softly. "That goes for a lot of us." He looks across the field. A Sherman sits nearby, its turret blown off but its chassis intact. Even in ruin, it looks powerful, well-built, balanced, confident. He remembers the terror of facing them in the desert, the helpless rage as his own shells bounced away. Now, standing beside one, he feels no anger, only respect. "The difference," he says quietly, "was never just armor. It was how they built, how they thought." Rinaldi nods. "And how we followed orders instead of changing them." The afternoon light glows golden as the two men sit on the hull of the Sherman, watching the engineers finish their work. Birds sing in the distance, a sound neither of them has heard since before the war. "Do you think they'll remember us?" Rinaldi asks. Benedetti shrugs. "Maybe not our names, but maybe the lesson." He gazes toward the mountains, where the wind carries the faint echo of trains' Allied convoys moving north, rebuilding a continent torn apart by machines. "The world learned how to fight fast," he says. "But maybe now it will learn how to build slow." Rinaldi smirks. "And us? We go home," Benedetti says. "Find work, maybe build tractors instead of tanks." For a long moment, they sit in silence, two soldiers surrounded by the bones of progress. As the sun dips behind the hills, Benedetti stands. He takes one last look at the burned-out Sherman, its armor glowing red in the twilight. He salutes. Not in surrender, nor in bitterness, but in understanding. War had taught him everything about defeat, and something deeper about survival. That courage without innovation is sacrifice, and that pride without purpose rusts faster than steel. He turns away, walking down the dirt road that leads toward the distant lights of a rebuilding Italy. The engines are silent now. The machines have slept, and in the quiet, only the wind speaks whispering through the wreckage of the past, carrying with it the last memory of the men who once fought in hopeless tanks beneath a merciless Sunday.